Meet Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, a trailblazer in longevity medicine, who, at nearly 70 years old, has the biological age of a man in his 30s. But his journey to youthful vitality wasn't always part of the plan. As a leading cardiologist for over 30 years, Dr. Gladden dedicated his career to cutting-edge cardiac care. He co-founded a heart hospital, developed cardiac catheterization labs, and established programs for heart attacks, heart failure, and arrhythmias, impacting countless lives. But by age 50, despite his successes, Dr. Gladden began to feel run down and exhausted. He went in for medical testing, only to hear the words, "You're just getting older. Why don't we start you on an antidepressant?" Dr. Gladden knew that something more was going on. Instead of accepting his diagnosis, he asked himself a powerful question: how good can I be? With this question as his guide, Dr. Gladden dove into the fields of integrative, functional, and longevity medicine, gaining new certifications and discovering an approach focused on restoration, not just treatment. Within 2.5 years, he reversed his symptoms and felt better than ever. This journey led him to create the Gladden Longevity Clinic, where he helps others ask, how good can I be? Today, he's on a mission to redefine aging, confident that we can live beyond 120 years and live well. He grounds his work in two profound questions. How do we make 100 the new 30? And how do we live well beyond 120? Dr. Gladden is transforming the way we think about aging, health, and potential. Join us in HealthGevity podcast on a journey that challenges conventional medicine and shows us all what's possible when we dare to ask, how good can we be?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of HealthGevity podcast. Again, today with Dr. Jose Luis Cordero. I am with one of the most famous scientists in the field of longevity, which for many years have been working in this field, someone that most of you know, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, founder and chief science officer of Gladden Longevity. Welcome, Dr. Gladden, to HealthGevity podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here, Dana. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So,
And Jose.
the first time actually I learned about you was from the podcast that you had with Mark Young. It was November 2017.
Oh.
And the podcast, was Living Beyond 120. And I was very interested in the topic and the way that you talked about it. So I started listening to you and following you, and even your last book that you wrote about 100 New 30. And today we have a lot of questions and we want to ask you about different topics about longevity. So first of all, what I'm interested in is to tell us a little bit about your personal background and the story that how you started studying, working, and being active in the field of longevity.
Yeah. My background, happy to do that. My background is interventional cardiology, right? And not every interventional cardiologist ends up in longevity, from what I can tell. But my story was that I was very happy being an interventional cardiologist. I actually worked in that area for 25 years, and I did a lot of things. I co-founded a heart hospital that's in Plano, Texas, a suburb of Dallas that's become nationally recognized. I built cath labs. I got involved with medical device companies. My own heart group, I had 12 doctors and 10 offices, and we flew around Texas and Southeast Oklahoma in a little airplane, delivering high quality care to people that couldn't have access to it. And the heart hospital was founded by asking different questions. We were trying to say, how can somebody that's going through an existential crisis of a cardiac event, how can they actually really be cared for? Not only them, but their families. And so we built a hospital where the rooms were big enough where family members could always sleep in the rooms with them, even if they're in the ICU, things like that. And so it was really designed around a different set of questions. So all that's going great. And yet in my early 50s, I started to really feel fatigued all the time, like exhausted all the time. And I also, it didn't matter how much sleep I got. And then I also was putting on weight. I was put on, weight around the middle, and I wasn't used to that. I'd always been very athletic, right? I played soccer in college and could run all day and things like that. And in my 40s, I realized that I'd leverage my health for the sake of building a practice. And I went for a run, and I could run 3 blocks, and I had to stop. And I like, oh my gosh, this is really out of control. So I got myself back into good shape again, biking and running and things like that. But then in my 50s, I hit another wall. And the weight was coming on, feeling exhausted, and I was under a fair amount of stress periodically with lots of projects and things like that. And when I would get really stressed, I'd feel myself becoming incredibly depressed, like going over a cliff or a waterfall into depression. And not the kind of depression that you could just say, well, I'll talk to a friend or I'll go for a run and I'll feel better, that kind of thing. It was just like, I just want out of here, right? And so it was all very concerning to me, and I was developing brain fog. And my father ultimately died with dementia and was suffering with it at that point in time. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happening here, right? So I went in and I got tested by one of my colleagues, and I was told when I came back to get the results that, all of your results check out just fine. Everything's normal for your quote unquote age. Why don't you just take an antidepressant? And oh my gosh, it was such an existential moment for me, right? I mean, here you are, you've got all these things that you're not only doing, but all the things you can see beyond what you're doing that you want to do. And somebody's kind of like pulling out the rug and saying, well, you've hit your zenith and it's just going to be downhill from here. And I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot make peace with this. And so that's what really threw me into the into the entire search, if you will, for answers. And that's when I started to look into functional medicine and integrative medicine and age management medicine. And at that time, it took me about 2.5 years. If we had the data in front of us today, we could figure it out in about 15 minutes. But it took me 2.5 years to figure out what was going on. And what I ended up realizing was that I had something called subclinical hypothyroidism. So all of my numbers, thyroid blood tests, were within the normal range. But at the cellular level, I was not getting enough thyroid into my cells. And so that was only picked up with biometric testing. That'll be missed on blood testing all day long. And then genetically, I don't convert inactive thyroid to active thyroid in my brain efficiently. I'm homozygous for that deficit, which gives me about a 60 to 70% decrease in my ability to do that. And so once I got on the right thyroid, right, a combination of active thyroid, T3, and inactive thyroid, which is typically prescribed T4, oh my gosh, the lights came back on. It's like, wow, I could jump out of bed again. I felt great again. And then I was getting hormonally depleted. So it's a bit of testosterone, some DHEA, 20 pounds of fat came off, 10 pounds of muscle went on. And then the anxiety and depression, I don't make neurotransmitters very efficiently. And once I could see where the problems were in the methylation cycle and other areas of my genetics, and I got on the right combination of supplements, not just methylfolate, but folinic acid, methylfolate, activated B6 and B12 and things like this. Then all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, I could be stressed and I wouldn't really feel it, right? So I loved all that. And then what really, really took me forward was learning how to meditate. I mean, from there, it's like, oh, well, now we can go into life in a very kind of Zen space, right? So it was transformative. And once that happened, I realized that up to date, up until that time, I'd been practicing sick care, and it was like, I can't do this anymore. I simply can't do it anymore. I have to go into this new field of health optimization, which is really foundational to longevity, right? And now it's become Gladden Longevity. So that's kind of how we got here.
Yeah. So you believe that the system that we have in most of the countries is not a healthcare system, right? It's a sick care system because
That's right.
we are not preventing from all of those diseases until that moment that we actually hit, and then it's very late. So
That's right.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is the same.
Yeah, there are levels to this, right? So there's sick care, which is truly reactive. Then sick care trying to do its best, which is called wellness, which is trying to be preventive, which is basically executive physicals and things where you're trying to diagnose disease early, right? That's the best they can do. But beyond that, there's health optimization. How do you actually optimize all the areas of health, not just the biology, but the psychospiritual side, as well as the performance side, right? How do you optimize all of that? And then you can step into really, how do you step into a new reality of longevity? So, yeah.
Great. This is a very interesting transformation that you went through. So how do you take these ideas into creating your own longevity clinic? How do you take that from yourself into the field?
Yeah. Well, we, people either read my book, 100 is the New 30, which was published last September, or I speak and people hear about what we're doing and they're drawn to it, or clients refer other clients, right? So, or they listen to us on the podcast or something like that and inquire. So we're really a practice that's geared towards answering certain questions. And what I mean by that is that when you go to most clinics, they have a set of solutions that they've discovered, right? We have stem cells, we have exosomes, we do PRP, whatever we do, we're doing young plasma, we're doing plasmapheresis, whatever the technology is, right? Or combination of them. And so it dawned on me that that's actually just analogous to what sick care doctors do. They get trained in a particular way and they get married to that particular way of doing things, right? Like if you came to me with chest pain, well, I know what to do as a cardiologist. We're going to do this and this. We'll do a heart cath. If you need a stent, we'll put in a stent. I call that being married to a set of answers, right? And I think one of the realizations that I had when I really started feeling good again was that I'd been trained in a way where the answers no longer worked. And I think that's not only true in sick care, but it can also be true in functional medicine and even in longevity medicine. And so in our practice, we've really developed 4 questions. The first one was a question that I started asking when I started to feel really good again in my 50s, was I wonder how good I can be, right? How good can I be, right? How good can I be? And that became a global question, not only physically and athletically, but psychospiritually and relationally and all these other ways, right? How good can I be? How good can life be? And then from there, it was, how do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live well? How do we crack the code on 120? The initial podcast, Living Beyond 120. Not only how do we get there, right? How we survive to that, but how do we actually live well beyond 120, crack the Hayflick limit? And then how do we live young for a lifetime, which is a total mindset. Like I'm 27, you may not realize it, but I'm 27, right? And I wake up 27 every day. And that mindset drives so much innovation and so much, it's such a strong reference point for me in terms of if I don't feel 27, what do I need to do to get back to 27? And that mindset drives so much activity and innovation for us. So in our practice, we have many, many answers, thousands of answers, but we're only driven by those questions, which keeps us on the leading edge of innovation all the time. And I think that's a big difference. I think the other thing that we love about the way we think here is that we are very focused on deconstructing the problem before we make recommendations. So when I was doing interventional cardiology, I started doing intravascular ultrasound back in the 90s when it first came on the scene. And it's basically threading a little catheter down a heart artery that enabled you to see from the inside out and look through the walls of the artery and see how much plaque was in the artery and where it was located and what the extent of it was. And I found that to be so incredibly helpful because all of a sudden you had a much better idea than you could get from just looking at a 2D angiogram, which was basically a 2D representation of a 3-dimensional, lumen of a tube, if you will. So that idea of deeper understanding enables us to get better results. We take that same approach here. So we really like to unravel the knot. We really like to deconstruct the entire individual across 4 different circles of areas that we're interested in. And once we do that, then we feel like we can get really durable solutions for people. So I think that's part of it.
Oh, that's amazing. So, in your book, actually, a very important part for me that I was listening to it many times was the part of the mindset, as you now talked about, that how much it's important that longevity mindset can change almost everything. Because when you have a mindset of living beyond 120, it totally directly affects your decisions that you make today. So I want to ask you that now, let's say a lot of people pay attention to their chronological age. For example, they're 60, 70 or over that, and they really feel that, okay, I'm really getting old. So I want to ask you this question that now that biologically probably you are between, let's say, 27, 30 or 40, what are the 3 most important things that you do as a routine in your lifestyle that gives you that mindset that you are still let's say 30-year young? We don't say 30 years old because we have to feel that young. So
that's right.
What are those 3 things that you do as a routine of your lifestyle, especially about the mindset?
Well, I think one of the first things is I exercise every day. I never have to wake up and decide whether I'm going to exercise today. If people say, well, I'm going to exercise 4 days a week. Okay. Well, now you wake up and you've got to decide, is today the day, right? Or is it going to be tomorrow? So I take the decision out of it. And I think we all succeed much better when there's no decision to be made. In fact, if there's a decision to be made around something, like I'm going to exercise 4 days a week, the failure rate actually goes to 100. It goes to 100. And so when you take the decision out and you say, no, I'm an exerciser, this is my identity, right? It's not just a habit I have. I've actually turned it into a ritual, which now I identify with. Then as an exerciser, I'm going to do something every day, right? And I think that's a really big jump forward. A lot of people still wrestle with that. I think the second thing that's really been incredibly helpful for me is learning how to meditate and to journal. And so I start every day. The first thing I do every day when I wake up is I take my thyroid, right? Because I have to take it and then not take anything else for 30 minutes. So I take my thyroid and then I'll sit down with a little journal that I have, a little five-minute journal, and it'll ask for 3 gratitudes that I have for that day. And then a couple of things that would make the day great. And then some affirmations about myself. And in that context, I use it as not only an opportunity to reflect for things that I'm grateful for, but also an opportunity to get in touch with that meditative state where you really connect to something much greater than you. And you become so grateful that here we are on this podcast, on this planet at this time. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful opportunity this is. You start to see the day for what it really is. And then you can go through the rest of your day with this sense of lightness, right? As opposed to this sense of heaviness and stress. So I think that's the second thing. And I think the third thing that really drives it is identifying with this younger age, right? Identifying with this younger age. And then how do you have questions? In life, you only get the answers to the questions that you're asking. So it is so important, if you're listening to this, to identify what questions are you asking. If you're asking, well, how am I going to retire? And then where am I going to live? And what are we going to do with the dog? And how are we going to visit the grandkids and play golf? Those are the answers that you'll get, right? If you're asking the question, how do I actually expand into the full expression of myself as a human being? And how do I actually make my biggest contribution to the planet? And how do I take all the expertise that I've learned through the years and continue to grow and enhance that? Then those are the answers that you'll get, right? If you're asking the question, how do I live young for a lifetime and never get an older mindset? Then you'll find ways to do that. So I think, that would be the third thing, is the whole mindset category. Yeah,
absolutely. About the questions you said, I think the quality of our life is directly actually created by the quality of questions that we ask ourselves. Because
100%.
The questions that we ask is the thing that we make our decision based on, and what our actions is again based on, and that's how determines the quality.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's right.
In terms of future developments, what do you think will be some of the most exciting advances in the science of aging that you believe will make us make 100 the new 30?
Yeah, well, I think it's happening. I think the biggest advancement is actually AI. We've been working with AI here for the last 4 to 5 years, actually, and now we're using it on a daily basis in the practice. And I think that the ability of AI is difficult for humans to comprehend. And because we tend to be more linear thinkers, it's difficult for us to actually relate to exponential processes. And yet AI and its ability to impact knowledge, information, insight, discovery is happening at an exponential rate. And so I was telling a friend, actually, I was in having lunch with a friend Saturday, and he's a client. He and his wife are both clients. And I said, I think that we're going to actually have the answers to aging in about 5 years. And he was like, really? You really think it can happen that fast? And I said, yes. I said, if you were to map it out in a linear fashion, I think it would be 15 years. But I think at the rate at which AI is going to contribute to this process, I think we will have most of the answers in hand in the next 5 years. right? And I know that it sounds like kind of a stunning statement, but you'll hear me say this at RadFest, Jose. I really believe that we're right on the cusp of this. We're really not far off. And I think it's going to come from a very deep understanding of the processes that are driving the aging process, right? Yes, there are supplements that will play a role. Yes, there will be procedures. Yes, there's stem cells. Yes, there's rebooting the immune system. All those things are going to play a role. But we're going to understand at a deeper level and be able to iterate from an experimental standpoint, utilizing AI, so much more quickly than we are able to today, that we're going to actually learn where are the key metrics in this system and how do we actually play that symphony, right? Not pushing on everything simultaneously. How do we play that symphony to actually create longevity? And I think it's actually very, very close. So I think AI is probably the biggest driver in this whole expression. So yeah.
Well, I actually agree. And I am a very good friend of Ray Kurzweil, who just published also his latest book, The Singularity is Nearer.
Nearer, yes.
And there he ratifies that we should reach longevity escape velocity by 2030. And that sounds incredibly close.
Yes.
In 2030, reaching longevity escape velocity, which basically means live long enough to live forever.
That's right. Yeah, and I agree with him on that. I've heard Ray speak several times. I know Peter Diamandis is a big echoer, so to speak, of Ray Kurzweil's message and things like that. But I've actually come to see it just in terms of, I don't know if you guys have been playing with AI, but just in playing with AI, you know, what's been available in the last 6 months has been crazy interesting to see how much more you can do with it now than you could 6 months ago. So when you start to extrapolate that, I totally agree with you. I think we're really going to have the answer. I'm going to talk about this at RadFest, by the way. And so the question I'm going to ask the audience is, so now what? Okay,
Absolutely.
now that you're immortal,
Yeah.
so now what, right?
Exactly. And what is interesting is actually that it's not only AI, you know, it's a kind of technological convergence that more than like 30 other technologies, from nanotechnology, biotechnology, computer, quantum computing, you know, and all other technologies are going to meet in within 5 years, and nobody actually can know even understand that what's going on after that. But
that's right.
Yeah, as I told you in the podcast that you had, which is Living Beyond 120. Well, we had a discussion with Aubrey de Grey, which actually it was like 20 years ago. He said that the person that can live over 1,000 is already among us. So I want to ask you first yourself about how far do you see for yourself? I mean, some people put a limitation on their life. They say, okay, for example, 120, 200. For example, I had a conversation with Sergey Young, actually, which said that I want to live to 200. And I said, why not 300? Why not 201? So how about you? Is there any limitation of how many years you want? Of course, we're talking about the quality, not just about the lifespan.
That's right. I think this is where I get into a couple of thoughts. One is it's such an abstraction, right? To live to 1,000. What does that even mean? To live to 300, right? What is to live to 200? To live to 180? You know, every picture, everything we have, every reference point we have for an older person at 100, 110 or whatever, you look at that image of that person and sometimes you're incredibly enthused that they're so sharp and they're so with it. And yet I wouldn't trade places with them, right? I wouldn't trade places with them, right? They don't have the youthfulness, they don't have the vitality, they don't have all the things that we really, quite honestly, value about ourselves. And so they're sort of heroes in a way, and yet none of us would want to be them, right? So I think what we do want to be is we want to live young for a lifetime. We actually want to be young for a lifetime. Now, I will tell you that if I get hit by a bus on the way home today from the office, I'm okay with that, right? I don't have a fear of death. This is not about a fear of death for me. It's really about a fear of decline, right? It's a fear of decline. And the flip side of the fear of decline coin is I want to actually live into a space where I can bring all of my gifts forward, right? And so I think the other side of this, how long do you want to live, becomes a question of what's the meaning of your life, right? What is your purpose? Why are you here? What is the meaning of life in general? Because I think when you get to a point where you do hit escape velocity, yes, there are practical considerations. Well, I guess I'll keep working, right? Because, I enjoy it and I feel good and I like it, right? But beyond that, it's a question of where does the meaning come from, right? As friends die away, as family members die away, as other things happen, where is the meaning in your life? How do you put all those pieces together? And I'm going to talk about this pretty extensively at RadFest, but I think it raises these really big questions about why would you want to live to 200, right? Is it to play more golf? Is that the reason? Catch another fish? It's so I think we get into these questions of, I want to live as young as possible for as long as possible, but only because I have a purpose, right? And I know what my purpose is. My purpose is here to crack the code on aging and then to step into the full expression of who I am, unencumbered by past traumas, past issues, and really be able to live in this very rich sort of psycho-spiritual space with great relationships and all kinds of meaning. And that to me is a wonderful future, right? So, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Continuing in this area, because I live in Spain, we just had the oldest living person in Spain until a few days ago. She was 117 years and a half, a little bit over a half. So that's a lot of time. Huh?
Yeah.
So what do you tell people who are skeptical about living to 120 or beyond? How do you address that skepticism, both scientifically and personally?
Yeah, I know. It's really an interesting thing. I think skepticism comes from many different angles, right? So you're a physician also, Jose, and I think in the medical field, people are skeptical because they've never seen it before, right? And I think the general populace can be skeptical because they've never seen it before. And they've only associated chronological aging with decline, quite honestly. And that whole construct is reinforced not only by their families, their friends, the companies they work with or for, the governments that, retirement ages and all these things. Everything is so conditioned into them that you're actually, if somebody's hearing about this for the first time, we talk about it all the time. So it's like, oh yeah, of course. But for them, when they hear it for the first time, it's almost like telling them that the sun is no longer, hot, it's cold, right? It's like, what are you talking about? It's almost like a complete flip of reality, if you will. And so I'm very empathetic, if you will, to people that are skeptical because it is such a radical departure from what they're used to. And I think most people haven't really constructed their lives to actually even want to do this, right? How am I going to pay for my food? Where am I going to live? What am I going to do? It raises so many sort of immediate existential questions for them that I'm very, very empathetic towards them in terms of, gosh, this is really, really disruptive, right? So it's only really in a process of acclimation to a new possibility that you can start to reconstruct the current reality to start to meet that possibility. And so it is a challenge for people, right? And it's a process that each of us went through, right, to some extent. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of very new to people, most of people. If, for example, 200 years ago, you asked someone that, what would you do in the age of 80? They had no idea because the lifespan was like 40, 50, and they could not imagine that, okay, how 80 or 90 looks like. So absolutely, it's so difficult for them. But I want to go back to let's say the background that you have as a professional cardiologist. There are a lot of factors, of course, all we know about the longevity, but I want to know the role of heart because, a huge percentage of, let's say, aging related diseases, the death from aging related diseases because of cardiovascular diseases. So what is the role of heart in living a healthier and longer life? And what can we do actually for our heart?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. So you've probably heard the phrase that man is only as old or young as his arteries, right? And so I think there was a physician out of England that might have coined that phrase. But I think there's some truth to that. I think that, a lot of heart disease is actually a function of lifestyle. Quite honestly, there are congenital defects, there are diseases, cardiomyopathies, infections of the heart, if you will, infections of heart valves, rheumatic fever, things like that. But the majority of Western hypertension and atherosclerosis and blocked arteries and things like that is really a function of lifestyle. And so I think, it's been shown that even without a lot of longevity interventions, that simply by making reasonable choices, prudent choices about how we eat, how we exercise, what we think about, the stress levels we put ourselves under, things like that, that you can actually have a dramatic impact on heart disease, right? So, the Pritikin diet was kind of in that framework. And, people have shown that using, plant-based diets, they can reverse heart disease, right? Esselstyn from the Cleveland Clinic did this with people that had bypassed 3 times and were no longer candidates and yet had abnormal stress nuclear scans and were having lots of symptoms. And he reversed them to the point where their scans looked much better and they could live their lives normally when they really cut out, almost everything but plants and took out vegetable oils and all these other things. So I think that, yes, we'll be able to, with stem cells and things like that, we can already help people reconstruct things. But I really think that cleaning up people's lifestyles is one of the keys to cardiovascular health. I can't help but also mention that I think that as important as the heart is, and I'm a cardiologist, I think the nervous system is infinitely more important, quite honestly. In fact, I'll make a bold statement here. I think all of life comes down to one thing. One thing, right? Pretty bold statement, right? All of life comes down to one thing: optimizing your nervous system. How you think, what you feel, how you react, what you believe to be true, what you believe to be possible, how you move, the actions that you take. I think this is our challenge in life, is to really optimize the nervous system, right? And now you're cutting across not only the psycho-spiritual space, but into the biological space and into the functional space and the movement space, et cetera. So I think the nervous system trumps the cardiovascular system. In fact, we know the nervous system drives a lot of disease in the cardiovascular system with high sympathetic nervous system tone and low parasympathetic nervous system tone. So I think if I had one system to work with, it would be that.
Yep. Fantastic.
Wow, that is quite an interesting idea. And I do believe the brain, in a way, is obviously the most important organ, certainly the most sophisticated organ in a way. But let's go back to your fantastic book. 100 is the new 30. So what inspired you to write that fantastic book? And what are the main messages that you would like readers to keep in their minds?
Yeah, great question. Well, I was inspired to write it because, we'd been developing thought processes and we'd been developing ideas about longevity, what it is and how to actualize it, how to crack the code on it. And I felt like it was time to put those thoughts into a book where people could access it, right? Professionals could access it, lay people could access it. And so I tried to write a book that was basically accessible to everyone in terms of the way it was written. And yet at the same time, outline what I thought were really the key elements that needed to be addressed if we were going to live young for a lifetime. And in that book, the major takeaways are related to understanding that there are 4 circles, right, that are, I think, critical for longevity. Since the book has been written, I've added a 5th. But the 4 circles that are written about in the book, and I'm going to write another book too, is the life energy circle, followed by the longevity circle, and then the health circle, and then the performance circle. So the life energy circle, kind of like in the Lord of the Rings, there's one ring that binds them all. The longevity circle is the one that binds them all because it is the psycho-spiritual space. When you think about mindset, right? You have a growth mindset or not. Are you married to your questions or are you married to your answers, right? Are you a binary thinker or are you a quantum thinker, right? Binary thinkers are basically attached to a particular outcome or a particular answer. Every conflict in the world today is a function of binary thinking, right? Everyone. You can't think of one, even in your own country, between different sects or people or politicians or whatever it is. It's all binary thinking. And yet, I think for real progress, we need quantum thinking. Just like in a quantum computer, you have a field of all possibilities, not just 2, not just 1 and 0. And from there, you pick the best solutions, right? So that's one of them. And then it's really important to understand that mental health is such a critical driver of whether we live a long time or we don't. I mean, there's so much anxiety, so much depression, right? So much addiction, PTSD, stress, etc. These things are really, really big drivers of aging. And I could go around this entire circle, but the circle is written about in great detail in the book and with a very empathetic tone, and also giving ideas about how to address each of these, right? So that's the first one. That's the life energy circle. The next one is longevity. And this is actually looking at the drivers of aging, the hallmarks of aging, if you will. And we're up to about 18 of those now. And being able to deconstruct those, measure those, and then figure out the things that are impacting them in a positive way. We keep making progress in that regard, right? So that's super interesting. There's such a big correlation, let's say, between telomere lengths and whether or not you're going to develop cancer, telomere lengths, and whether or not your immune system is youthful or not, right? And so that's just one example. And then there's a whole DNA methylation story, which has become very interesting and a nice way to deconstruct kind of where you are in the aging process. So there's all of the longevity pieces. And then you get to the health pieces, which are basically what sick care focuses on, but they do it from a reactive perspective as opposed to a preemptive perspective. And so all the organ systems are included there. And then the last circle is the performance circle, which is basically when I'm 100, I want to be fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced with a great sense of cardiovascular endurance, recovery, flexibility. And if I'm going to be that at 100, then I need to be that now, right? So what am I doing to actually optimize that? And that comes down to the nervous system, right? You know, so many people as they age, they start to fall, they break things, right? You hear this over and over and over again. It's the nervous system that's failing them, right? So you have to, when you're 18, you can lift some weights and go for a run and everything's good. But as you go through life, you have to be training each one of those things, right? So balance is so important, dynamic and static balance, and, you know, reaction times and things like that. So we can measure all these things and train all these things. And the fifth circle that's not in the book is incredibly important, which is actually architecting the environments that you reside in or work in to support the mission, so that it's as effortless as possible to live young for a lifetime. You know, what food are you going to eat when you're on vacation? How are you going to work out? What are you going to do? You know, we have clients that will be doing great. They go to Italy for 3 weeks. No backlash on Italy. But they go to Italy for 3 weeks and they say the wheels came off. You know, it's like we stopped doing everything. We're drinking wine, we're doing all this stuff, and the wheels come off. So really being able to architect those environments to really support the mission across all four circles becomes another key piece. So
fantastic. Yeah. Well, talking about the environment, actually, this is why we have created the HealthGevity Nation initiative. It's been years that we are working on that, and our main goal is exactly to democratize health and longevity, not in terms of just technologies and intervention, but lifestyle, because I think personally 80% is about lifestyle and just 20% remains for the technology and all other interventions. So I want to ask you your idea about what we are doing and actually how it can help the whole, let's say, I can say environment or people all around the world that are thinking about longevity, which is we have some plans to teach children from school and create a culture about the lifestyle, how they can actually take control of their lifestyle by having a good high quality sleep, exercise, diet, nutrition, let's say, even the communication with other people, and a lot of other factors. And also among young people, we are trying to do that so that we want to create this atmosphere in all different countries. And that's why we have called it a nation without any limitations of, you know, language, culture, or countries, nothing. It's only about the mindset, having a mindset. And already we have more than 37 ambassadors in different countries. How do you see this if we invest on young people for the next generation? How do you think it would change the whole society?
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing. I mean, I can't tell you how great it is, really. I mean, it's spectacular what you're doing. You know, longevity really sort of starts with people in the past when they kind of reached a point where they started to feel their own mortality, right? And at that point, then they start to ask the question, well, geez, what's happening? Am I going to slip from here, or can I get some of this back, or what's going to happen, right? So, but what's been interesting to me is that younger generations now are seeing what's happening in that space. And now they're actually wanting to jump in. People in their 30s, now people in their 20s. And now, we've been working with families with kids in college now and sort of changing their trajectories, doing genetics to tee them up to understand, what are their assets and what are their liabilities? How are we going to do these things? And then being able to reprogram their brains through certain transcranial magnetic stimulation protocols we have to actually get rid of their anxiety and PTSD and actually help them perform academically much stronger and things like that. So, when young people, I think, are equipped with the tools that they need, it makes a big difference. And I think if we can go all the way back to elementary school, I think that's where it really needs to start, because I have kids. I don't know if you have kids, but my my advice to parents, I have kids in their 40s now, and I have kids in their 20s. And my advice to parents, mid-20s to late 20s, my advice to parents is, if there's anything you need to tell your child or anything you want to tell them, you better do it by age 12. Because after age 12, they are not listening, right? It's all about their peer group. It's all about the people they're around. Now, granted, they'll talk to you about some things, but really, for the most part, they're really starting to do what they're supposed to do, which is differentiate from the family, become their own person, and figure out who they are, right? So I think going back to elementary school, where you can really sort of start to put some of this in play, where kids are very interested, very curious, they want to listen, is really the place to start. And I think it's great. The more we can do that, the better. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, what is important for us, especially about a kind of paradigm shift that unfortunately nobody taught us, when we were a child, which is about aging itself. We saw it as something that, okay, whether we want it or not, it will happen, no matter what we will do about it. So this wrong mindset, if we can try to change it in our, let's say, new generation, and they know from now that we can do a lot actually about it. So they don't need to be necessarily like their grandparents and suffer from all of those diseases. This is, I think, will change the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting to me that a lot of people that I've spoken with, even my college roommate, a dear friend of mine to this day, his father died of a heart attack at age 62. Very, very distinguished guy, well-educated guy, Harvard trained, etc. Not a physician, but a very, very bright man. And he dropped dead on a tennis court at age 62. And my friend has always had this in the back of his mind that the same thing is going to happen to him, right? And even though, we've done numerous things for him through the years, and he's now, chronologically he's 70. So obviously that hasn't happened to him, but he still sort of lives in the shadow of, these are my genetics and this is what's going to dictate to me. And I think for people to understand that their genetics are not their destiny, it's really a set of proclivities or a set of propensities, if you will, of things that could happen if you put the genes in the wrong environment. But if you put the genes in the right environment, you don't have to suffer Alzheimer's. You don't have to get heart disease. You don't have to have an aneurysm, things like that. So I think getting that message into children that, look, your life is here for you to create. And yes, this is what these are your starting blocks. We all get dealt a hand to play, right? Well, this is your starting card, so to speak. But here's how you're going to play that hand. And when you play this hand well, look, the future for you can be unbelievable. You can surpass anything your grandparents or parents ever even dreamed possible. I think that's a wonderful message for kids. So,
Absolutely.
Yes, I have one more question.
Okay.
What legacy do you hope to leave through your work in longevity medicine, and what impact do you hope to have on future generations?
Well, that's a small question. I think, I think my purpose in life, quite honestly, is to really play a key role in helping us crack the code on aging, number one, because I think, it's just been associated with so much pain and so much strife, if you will, in people's lives. So that's really my purpose. I have another purpose, though, which is to kind of live into this place of being unencumbered by the past, right? So everybody I've ever met has had trauma. I'm sure each of you has had trauma in your lives, right? Everybody has. And many of us, we end up living in reaction to that trauma, right? And so I think part of our goal as we develop as humans is not only protect our health, but to expand in the psychospiritual space to where we actually come to deeply understand that trauma, why it happened, how it happened, who was involved, what role we might have played or how we were the victim of it, whatever it was, and then be able to heal that trauma and then actually be able to transcend that trauma to the point where we actually become grateful for everything that happened because it's actually moved us closer to being on this podcast here today where we can talk about these things. And from there, when you actually start to become unencumbered, right? And you now can live your unencumbered life where really you now understand that life is really all about love and creating and joy. It's that triad. It's that triad. And so when you're no longer concerned about your health per se, because you have your health and you're no longer living in reaction to traumas that you've had, now you can actually step into the day and have loving conversations with your clients, with your podcast co-hosts. And from that loving space, you create. And from that creation comes joy, which feeds back into the love. And now you want to live forever because it's like, oh my gosh, we get to create and love and do all this joyous stuff all life long, right? It's like, why would we want to die? So that's kind of what I think about that. Yeah, that's the legacy I want to leave is somebody that kind of pointed the direction towards that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, so the final item may be the question that we haven't asked you or something that you are so passionate about. Probably, I don't know, about your clinic, what you are doing there, maybe a project or something. Please let us know.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us right now is continuing to innovate every day, right? Which we do. But we want to basically, right now we're located in Dallas, Texas. We want to take this global, right? We're being invited to go many places and we're working with partners to help us do that. And I think that's one of the most exciting things is to help democratize this and make it accessible to even more people across the planet. So I think that's one of the big passions I have right now, for sure. Yeah.
That's fantastic, Jose. Maybe any questions or that's it?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. We have your book. I think everybody should be reading 100 is the new 30. And hopefully maybe in the future, 100 is the new 20. Who knows?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. I think that's right. I mean, this was an interim text, right? So that's
Fantastic.
great.
So, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, please let us know how our listeners can learn more about you, what you are doing, which social platform you are more active in.
Sure. So, you can go to the website, the GladdenLongevity.com website. We have a podcast also, Gladden Longevity Podcast. We have about, I think 250 episodes, including the ones that started off as Living Beyond 120. So we're interviewing people constantly on really interesting topics. So that's another way. And then we're on social media. I'm personally not on social media, but I know the marketing people are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and things like that. So you can connect with us that way. The book is a good way to connect. It's really, a lot of people tell me how well written it is. It's not a short book. So if you want to read something that's fairly comprehensive, I think it's a great start. And it's also on Audible. I actually read the book myself. It took me a week to read it out loud, and actually made it a much better book. I don't know if you've written a book or done an Audible book, but when you read it out loud, all of a sudden, oh, I could make that sentence better. I could make that clearer, right? And so there were some edits that went in there. But if you like listening to books, it's on Audible as well. And those will be the main ways to reach out to us. And if you'd like to think about being a client or explore that, you can reach out through the website. We'll be happy to have a conversation with you and understand what your aspirations are and what your hurdles are and see if we can be helpful to you. So, yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Actually, personally, I listened to your book because it's been like 10 years that just I'm listening because it's more effective for me. I mean, I can listen probably 1 or 2 books a week, easier than reading it. And I'm actually listening to it for the second time because this book is not just to listen to it, because I think it's like a workbook. We need to work on each chapter and try to do it and make it a part of our lifestyle. So that's amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that everybody reads this book. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to talk with you guys. Really, it's you're doing a wonderful job. I can't commend you enough for that. So thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And live long and prosper. I'm a Trekkie, so live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. I'm not a Trekkie, but all good. I'll give you my shaka here. So
yeah,
good
live
stuff.
long and prosper. Thank you.
Yeah. See you at RadFest.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.